Professor Henderson, if you can present your work on the corporate social responsibility.
I've been working on and thinking about corporate social responsibility for some years now, and I'm a strong critic of the modern notion of corporate social responsibility, capital letters, uppercase, CSR. I believe that companies should act responsibly, and they should be seen to act responsibly. I don't believe, however, that responsible corporate behaviour today implies accepting what is now called CSR, corporate social responsibility. I'm opposed to that on two grounds. First, I think that the justification for CSR that's commonly given is mistaken. I think it rests on a view of the world which is quite misleading. I'm also against it because I think that its adoption by businesses would not in fact make the world a better place, but would do more harm than good. Just a word about both those. First, the view of the world on which CSR rests. It's often said that globalization has changed the situation in such a way that companies have to reconsider their objectives, their goals, their mission. And I think that's wrong. Globalization is not new. It isn't a wave that's overcome the world. It hasn't marginalized poor countries. It hasn't created social exclusion. Closer international economic integration through markets has not had the effect of giving power to multinational companies, and it has not reduced the power of governments. The whole idea that companies now have to take a new role in global governance because they've acquired powers to influence events and governments have lost them, so they must move into a kind of power vacuum, is, I think, profoundly mistaken. All the same, you might argue that CSR won't do much harm, and I think, in fact, it has the potential to do harm. I think its consequences could be damaging through what happens both at the level of individual firms and what happens at the level of the economy as a whole. If you look at individual firms, it means that costs will be raised because managers have to take account of a wider range of goals and objectives. They have to put in systems for ensuring that these objectives are met. They have to put in systems for monitoring and auditing. All that adds to costs. And on top of that, they have to incur higher costs because they commit themselves to higher standards in social and environmental standards. Again, it's not only within their own firms that this may happen. They have to commit themselves according to CSR. They have to commit themselves to ensuring that their suppliers, their contractors, their joint venture partners, and even on some extreme interpretations, their customers, observe these same standards. All that adds to costs, and those costs are passed on to the people who buy the products. It's arguable against that, or it is argued, that this will make the world a better place if companies do this, and I think that that is extremely doubtful. I think it's more likely to do more harm than good if companies set standards which have no clear social justification. Higher standards in themselves, higher normal standards and regulations are not necessarily beneficial, and it's quite possible, I think it's likely, that CSR will simply ensure a more regulated world within companies. If you look at the economy as a whole, rather than individual companies, then I think the worrying prospect opens up that companies will be increasingly compelled to follow the path of those who've gone ahead with so-called socially responsible conduct. If this happens, companies that have taken this path and have lost competitively as a result will increasingly bring pressure to bear, or expect pressure to be brought to bear on their rivals, either through public opinion or through legal action by governments. And this will reduce competition and takes away the rationale for private business, makes the market economy function worse. I think in that context, the most worrying prospect, most worrying single effect that CSR may bring for the economy as a whole and indeed for the world as a whole is that unsuitably high standards will be enforced on firms operating in developing countries and on those developing countries themselves. that deprive countries, poor people in countries, of employment opportunities which they would be glad to take. So to sum up, I think that CSR is based on a view of the world which is very open to question, and I think actually putting it into effect would do damage both at the level of the firms that do it, that enforce it, and at the level of the economy as a whole.
What will you respond to people saying that CSR, after all, is good marketing for corporations?
It could be. I don't argue that CSR will be bad for profits. I'm sure there are cases where being seen to be what is said to be socially responsible is good for profits. My argument is that whatever its effects may be on profits in particular cases, in particular firms, general adoption will do more harm than good. So even if, in particular cases, it is the right thing for a business to do profit-wise, I think it's very unfortunate that the situation has arisen in which firms are being pushed in this direction.
How difficult is to criticize CSR while it gets so large support from the community, the government and the firms?
There are very few opponents now. It is very hard to take a stand against something which sounds so reasonable and sounds such an attractive course of action as corporate social responsibility. And to repeat, I don't advocate that companies should behave not responsibly. On the contrary, I think they should. They should act responsibly, they should be seen to act responsibly, but that's not the same thing as adopting CSR.